Of course, installing that cyclone is only half the battle. We now have an entire duct system to install to make sure that all the tools are fully connected in the most efficient way possible. Now, frankly, you can do this yourself. You can do the calculations to figure out how many CFMs this tool requires, make sure that this pipe has it. That's a little bit over my head. That's something that I think people spend a lot of time mastering. It's a knowledge base that I don't really have. So it's something that I really do recommend that you rely on some of the great services out there. Pretty much, most of the companies that sell ductwork also have a ductwork planning service, but they are going to need something very important from you, and that is a layout. They need to know where the tools are, the distances from the walls, the distance between the tools, the distance to the dust collector. If you can give them that information, they could design a ductwork system that'll work for you. And then also, the great thing is they'll be able to give you the parts list, and then you could just purchase that whole set, bring it to the shop, lay it out, and you're good to go. Now, what I recommend using is SketchUp. If you haven't used it before, it's a very user-friendly system. You can actually get models for the individual tools. You don't have to build them yourself, and just drop them into place, and you can kind of get a good approximation. But if your shop is already together, you could just take measurements with a tape measure and really think in terms of where the ports are. If you're having trouble figuring out exactly where to measure to, give that information to the planning service and you'll be good to go. Now, once the ductwork arrives, I recommend laying it out on the floor, putting it in its approximate location where it would be on the ceiling, and make sure you have all the parts, all the fittings, all the Ys, all the elbows, blast gates, everything that you need, and that'll give you a little bit more confidence that once you're lifting this stuff up to the ceiling and assembling it piece by piece, you know that everything's pretty much there and you won't have to make any emergency trips or place any extra orders. All right, so the first thing I want to do is give you a quick tour of what I've done so far. I've actually done pretty much most of the work to get this thing installed because I want to show you one particular branch. If you see how one branch is installed, you know how the system works. You can install any branch that way. All right, so first, let me show you the details of the system that I'm using because the ductwork in and of itself is very, very important. You could use PVC, you could use HVAC ductwork, the snap lock stuff, but really the thicker, more industrial you can go, I would say this is something you may want to stretch your budget on a little bit because I think it's absolutely worth it to get the high quality stuff. What I've got here is something that I've never worked with before, but it's an industrial type pipe. It's called Nordfab. It's very quick to connect the pieces together, saves a lot of time and a lot of hassle. Frankly, the stuff is a dream to work with. If you can get this stuff, great. If not, the one thing I would recommend you do, I mean, there's a lot of things that will work, but stay away from the absolute thin stuff. I think it's like a 28 gauge material that you can get. Stay away from that stuff. That's the things you can get at like a Home Depot and Lowe's, your local home center. That stuff is not really meant for this type of work. That can and will collapse under its own weight or under the suction power of a good powerful cyclone or dust collector. So stay away from the super thin stuff. All right, so let me show you pretty much how this system works, and then we'll go and actually install one of my final branches. Here's a typical drop setup. A horizontal length of straight pipe meets a 90-degree elbow. The elbow clamps on quickly and easily. Not only is this clamping system convenient, it also joins the pipes with no interior obstructions. In this scenario, we're splitting the line to two separate tools, so I add a Y. Each branch then receives a blast gate to control the airflow. To connect the flex hose, I'll finish off the series by attaching a flex hose adapter. And the flex hose slides right on and is secured with a standard hose clamp. So as you can see, it is a really straightforward system. There's no screws involved. You just put the pieces together, clamp them down, and move on to the next piece. But that convenience comes at a price. Again, the stuff is not cheap, but I think it really is worth the investment if you're looking at a fairly permanent setup. All right, so now that we know how to install one of these pieces, let's actually go and look at the layout on the ceiling, and I'll give you a few tips. I don't really do this all the time, so I'm not going to profess to have any sort of amazing knowledge on the topic, but I'll show you what I did that made my life a little bit easier when hanging it, and then we'll actually install the last branch of the ducting system. Now, this is certainly one of the more precarious positions I've ever filmed in. Wish me luck. What you can see here are straps. These metal straps are what's basically holding all of the weight of this system and holding it to the ceiling. Now, my rafters, my trusses, are going this way across the shop, and they're spaced every 24 inches. So the cool thing is you can use your stud finder and basically find one and then measure every 24 inches from there to get the locations. And I would suggest pre-marking those with pencils so you know where they are. The worst thing is, if you're sitting up here with a length of pipe and you're trying to find a stud as you're moving across, probably not a great idea. So if they're pre-marked, you're in good shape. Now the other thing is, this whole line runs basically parallel with the wall. So I wanted to make sure that those marks that I put in the ceiling were not only showing me where the stud is located, so I could drill right into the truss, it's showing me a specific distance from the wall. So this way I know that my pipe is tracking parallel and not skewing in one direction or the other. Now to make my life easier for making those measurements and keeping this pipe parallel, I just cut myself a piece of scrap here, cut to the exact length that basically represents the distance from the wall to the center of my pipe. So whenever I laid out one of the truss locations, I'd put this guy right up into the corner, mark it with a pencil, and I'd have an exact reference line that just kind of keeps me, keeps my head straight. When you're up on a ladder like this and you're trying to look around, it's very difficult to tell when things are going perfectly parallel, nice and straight and level. So things like this will really help a lot. But having those marks on the ceiling ahead of time just makes your life a whole lot easier and frankly makes the installation much safer. Now here's a look at the hardware that I'm going to use to hang the ductwork. There's a lot of different ways you could hang ductwork. This one just works for me. I find it simple and easy for a one-man operation. What I use primarily is this metal strapping material. It's fairly flexible and it's got different sized holes in here, but when secured properly, it's really strong. And I'm going to use a lot of these along the length of the pipe so that no one is bearing the entire load. What I recommend against is using a very similar material, but it's plastic. Right, this strapping, it's fairly strong, but you run into a problem where this stuff can very easily stretch. So depending on the type of screw you use, under a lot of weight, this could certainly give and cause you some serious problems. So I recommend not using that. Now, when I have an actual stud to go into or a truss, I'm going to use one of my regular wood screws, but the problem is the tapered head on these, and I'm using this because I have a lot of these, the tapered head can really cause an issue because it can, just like I mentioned with the plastic stuff, it can cause the material to give as it follows that taper. So either use a pan head screw or you can actually get yourself a little washer. And by putting a washer on there, it may not look the best, but it certainly gets the job done. That distributes the pressure around the outside of that hole and gives you a whole lot more support, and there's less of a tendency for that to pull and stretch against the holes that we have here. All right. The other thing you might want to consider is sometimes you just don't have wood to screw into. You need to go into the drywall for support, and I recommend just using good old toggle bolts for these. So the difference here is you're going to need a washer. So I put a washer on one end, put it through the strap, and then connect the actual toggle dealie. All right, screw your hole into the drywall, pop this guy through, and then you've got a pretty good secure connection that way. So this is really the selection of things that I'm going to use to hang all of my ductwork. Now you could take measurements with this stuff, but I find it much easier to work with the actual pieces because sometimes it's difficult to tell how far out a piece is going to be when a fitting is attached. I just find it easier to put that fitting on there and hold the piece up. This stuff isn't that heavy if you're just dealing with one or two small pieces. All right, so what I'm going to do is hold this piece up, bring it so that the elbow pretty much touches the wall, and then I've got my Sharpie ready to make the mark where it actually intersects with the other connection here, the other fitting. All right, just going to put a mark here. To cut the pipe, I mark a second line a few inches back from the first. This makes the pipe a little bit short, but that's okay. I use one of the clamps to extend the line all the way around the pipe. I then use a drill to create a hole that's big enough to accept my jigsaw blade. With a metal cutting blade installed, I cut the pipe by keeping the tool still and rotating the pipe with my free hand. To attach the nipple, I simply slide it onto the cut side of the pipe. The included rubber O-ring is then rolled over to the cut side, and a clamp joins the two pieces together. So now back on the ladder with the elbow attached, we're going to line everything up and see how we did. Okay, so I have to pull it back, I don't know, maybe about 2 inches. Right, and this is actually a quick adjustment I can make right up here. Loosen the clamp. Bring this guy back about 2 inches. Now, if your main line is nice and secure and you've got a lot of support, you should have no problem putting a small length of pipe like this out unsupported. You may see it sag a little bit, but the next thing we're going to do is secure this end up at the corner there, and that'll take all the weight off. So just for the few minutes that we need to get all that stuff ready, this should be just fine. So I'm just going to slip my clamp on and then clamp it in place. Now, the next order of business is to think about exactly how we want the dust collection to resolve down here. Once we figure that out, we just need to make the connection with a straight pipe up to that elbow up there. So we actually have this from our demo earlier, and this gives us an idea of exactly how these pieces are going to work. And you have to look at where the ports are on your various machines and see if you could decide on a way that limits the amount of flex tubing that you have to use. Bottom line is you just can't get away from using it, you just want to limit the amount. So I'm thinking a good height, because part of the thing that I'm concerned about is where the blast gates are, and I don't want to have to stretch too far to get the blast gates. So I think right about here, I think if this guy terminated right about in this area, maybe at the bottom of this outlet, that probably would be pretty good. Now, it certainly doesn't always work out this way, but check this out. This is a full, uncut, 5-foot length, right up to the elbow, and look where the bottom terminates. So sometimes you get lucky. I'm going to install the other blast gate. Of course, the connections are all going to be made on a tool-by-tool basis, depending on your needs, but you should be able to easily get a piece of 4-inch flex pipe onto the fitting and then onto the tool itself. There we go. Now that's all there is to assembling one of these ductwork systems. We did an entire drop, went down to the Y and split off to 2 separate tools. That's pretty typical in my shop. I have a lot of tools clustered together, although my bandsaws are separated and they're the only ones that have a single drop. Every other one is something like this. And really, if you do one, you know how to do the rest. You just might have a slight variance in the type of Y that you use or the diameter of the ductwork that's dropping down, but the principle is the same. Now, if you're not using Nordfab, you just have a little bit more work ahead of you. You probably have a little more trouble cutting the material. I know I've installed the snap lock pipe before and I've cut them by hand, which can really wear you out pretty quickly. But the bottom line is you just put a little bit more effort into it and you'll still end up with a very serviceable ductwork system. But I have to say, for the amount that I change my mind, and if you've been watching this show long enough, you know that I change my mind pretty darn frequently, probably more than I change my underwear. So I need a system that is adaptable, a system that can be disassembled and reassembled without wasting parts and materials. So this fits the bill perfectly for me. Now, we've done the assembly of one drop, but I would like to show you some of the other drops and also just give you an idea of what the entire system looks like so you can see the thought process that went behind it. And there's some unique things about this one, so let's check it out. The intake chute of the Cyclone features a custom transition that connects to a piece of flexible metal ductwork. Think of it like one of those bendy straws that kids and my wife enjoy drinking out of. The next connection is a Y that sends a branch out to the planer and drum sander. And you can see I also have a capped Y at the top that allows for future expansion. And you can see the 2 drops here for both of these tools, individually controlled with each having its own blast gate, and it basically reduces down from 6 inches eventually to 4 inches where I have this flex tube attached. The next connection is another Y that sends a branch to the table saw and joiner, followed by a branch for the stationary sanders. Later, I have drops for each of the bandsaws. Now the drop for the table saw and the jointer, this was important to be able to really close each one off effectively and as close to the Y as possible because obviously both of them produce a lot of dust and there's a pretty long flex tube run to get these things connected, so I wanted to make sure I had as much movement, air movement there as possible. Right? But you see what I did here is even after the reduction, after the blast gate, I had some small 4-inch elbows that helped me make this turn a little bit, and it's always better to make those turns very slightly and with rigid material if you can. So I've got one that helps me go in the proper direction for the jointer, and another that kind of just gives me a little bit of direction for the table saw. Now, even though my old system in the old shop was also a Clearview CV1800, the ductwork was really its major downfall. I kind of just did the best I could with what I had at the time, and it was a lot of hodgepodge materials, and I had to make a lot of turns. And every time you make a turn and you take your main line and turn it 90 degrees, you are losing airflow. So the other thing was the ceilings were so darn high, and I had those big drops to pull all of that material up. So one thing that constantly plagued me was clogging in the jointer. And in fact, even though this guy's been in storage for a long time, there's a ton of dust wedged inside the system. And I don't know if you look closely, you can actually see it right at the port. So just for fun, I figured I would fire up the system and see what happens, leaving this line open and just seeing if it's going to pull it out, and if it does, how effectively. So let's see what happens. So that was pretty cool. As you can see, the new setup makes a huge difference. I even let that run a little bit longer and noticed some maple coming out. I don't know when the last project was that I actually built with maple. So that stuff has been stuck and caked in there for a while, and this system was able to pull it out. That's really just a testament to the ductwork setup, because I had the CV1800 set up at the other shop, and I wasn't able to collect that efficiently. So it really comes down to not only having a good quality, powerful system, but coupling that with a ductwork system that's been designed by someone who knows what the heck they're doing. I designed the other one myself, and it was horrible as a result. So it's very important that you take advantage of these design services. If you're going to go through the expense, the time, the effort to do a ducted system, do it right, because it's going to make a huge impact on the final result. And frankly, if you have the ductwork designed right, you may not need quite as powerful of a system as you think you need. Don't use brute force, use knowledge to make sure that this is done efficiently. All right, so that's really about it. I want to wish you guys a happy woodworking safety day. Stay safe in your shops. And if you have any questions about this dust collection stuff, let's talk about it in the comments. I don't know a whole lot about it, but after this experience, I definitely have a better perspective on what you might need to do for the most efficiency. All right, thanks for watching. And once again, happy woodworking safety day.